you very much for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the UN warns that ethnic divisions in South Sudan's crisis are deepening. This after aid workers report seeing the bodies of hundreds of civilians believed to have been slaughtered by rebels as they seized the oil hub of Bentiu last week. Also, Mali's Minister of Reconciliation heads to Algeria in a bid to push efforts to reconcile Bamako's relations with armed Tuareg rebels in its north. And Guinea agrees to strip Israeli billionaire STEINMETZ's company of the mining rights to the world's biggest untapped iron ore deposit. Conakry is acting on the recommendation of a watchdog that says the rights were obtained through corruption. First up, the UN has warned that ethnic divisions in South Sudan's crisis are deepening and that hundreds of civilians were slaughtered by rebels as they seized the oil hub of Bentiu last week. Fighters reportedly hunted down DINKA men, women and children in the capital of Unity State, whilst local radio reportedly broadcast hate speech. More than 1 million people have fled their homes since fighting erupted in South Sudan in December. This between troops backing President Salva Kiir and soldiers loyal to ex-Vice President Riek Machar. It sparked a cycle of revenge killing between Kiir's DINKA people and Machar's Nuer. The UN says the violence is worse than it feared.
I arrived in Bentiu and started driving from the airstrip into the town. We saw dead bodies lying on the side of the road, and these were people who had been killed 4 or 5 days earlier when the city changed hands. Then, as we drove further into town and reached the market, and we started seeing large numbers of bodies decomposing, groups of people who, by all evidence, looked like they were civilians and looked like they had been executed. This is a crisis of protection. Civilians' rights are being abused and have been by both sides of the conflict, and sadly often based solely on their ethnicity or their identity of who they are. I mean, this shows that spiral of violence is descending the country further into chaos and horrific suffering. You know, in addition to the violence that we're seeing right now, we're not even sure that this is the peak of the crisis. We're looking at a catastrophic decline in food security and hunger if this violence continues. We're risking a famine for many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, if violence doesn't end. So it really is true that the longer this goes on, the worse it will be for South Sudan for a very, very long time to come.
Amanda Weller there speaking to me a little earlier on. In other news, teachers say that the number of girls still missing after suspected Islamist extremists launched a mass abduction from a school last week is far higher than authorities have announced. Official figures said that 129 were taken. The governor of Borno State says 77 are still accounted for, whilst parents are looking for 234. Boko Haram insurgents are the prime suspects as they've ramped up a campaign of violence. Confusion over the total of abducted girls has added to fears that authorities have been trying to cover up the boldness of the raid rather than concentrate on getting the victims back. Dozens of girls are said to have escaped, but soldiers and civilians are still looking for the hostages who were taken from Chibok outside the Sambisa forest. A Somali member of parliament's been killed in an attack by al-Shabaab extremists in Mogadishu. The al-Qaeda-linked Islamist group claimed responsibility for the car bomb that killed Isaac Mohammed Rinoko. It says it set off the device in revenge for Parliament's backing of foreign forces in the country and threatened to carry out more attacks. Al-Shabaab was pushed out of the capital in 2011, but has since continued to wage a campaign of violence in a bid to overthrow the government. Mali's new Minister of Reconciliation is headed to Algeria in a bid to push peace efforts between Bamako and armed Tuareg rebels in its north. The hope is that a partnership with Algiers can help mediate and keep the fractious channels of dialogue open.
The new Malian Minister for National Reconciliation went to Algiers over the weekend to see about eventual talks with Tuareg rebels. Zahabi Ould Sidi Mohammed was a former rebel leader in the 1990s before working with the United Nations. He was named this month to give a second wind to talks with the armed groups of the north. He could find a solution in Algeria.
Much work has been done in a discreet manner. We are optimistic that soon the armed groups could engage informal talks here in Algeria before going to talks in Mali.
Bamako has been making strong efforts to convince Tuareg groups to return to talks. President Keita has sent Mohamed El-Mehdi Al-Ansari, one of the patriarchs of the Tuareg community, to Kidal, stronghold of the MNLA group. Al-Ansari had returned not so long ago to Bamako from exile in Burkina Faso. In Kidal, he went directly to see the traditional chieftain Intala Ag Ataher, head of the Adrar des Ifogas region. He is considered to be the leading moral authority of all the tribes in this part of Mali.
In the past, he had decided to hold a gathering in Kidal to bring together all the communities in the north. Tamashek, whites and blacks, Peul and Sonrai, all the communities on both sides of the river.
The city of Kidal still rejects any authority from Bamako. It is controlled by United Nations and French army forces, but still in the grip of armed rebel groups. The Malian army does not go there, and the administration stays in a restricted area.
A top Rwandan singers pled guilty to terror charges after appearing alongside 3 others accused of plotting to attack government officials. Genocide survivor Kizito Mihigo is alleged to have collaborated with dissidents in Congo-based FDLR rebels. His arrest surprised many of his supporters, as he'd previously worked closely with the government of President Paul Kagame on unity and reconciliation programs. Prosecutors say, though, that they have a strong case.
3 of them pleaded guilty. The trial will continue on Thursday. 2 of them didn't have lawyers. They are charged with threatening state security, of wanting to overthrow the government, of wanting to assassinate the President of the Republic.
Guinea-Conakry's decided to revoke the mining rights to one of the largest untapped iron ore deposits in the world. They had been granted to the mining branch of Israeli diamond magnate Benny STEINMETZ's business empire. But a watchdog looking into the deal recently recommended it be canned, as the rights were allegedly won through corruption. Well, our Africa editor Nicolas Chemin gives us the details.
The whole story began in 2008. At the time, Benny Steinmetz and his group BSGR, they decided to invest $170 million in the Simandou mine. And then only 2 years later, he sold 51% of those assets for 14 times the price that he'd bought them. This figure of 14 times more shocked many Guineans. It also shocked the first democratically elected president of Guinea, Alpha Condé, who decided to launch an investigation. And the report has just been carried out over the last few years. The report has just come out, and it concludes that, yes, indeed, there was a case of corruption, and the government has decided to follow this report and therefore to strip Benny Steinmetz and his group of this contract. Basically, what the report says is that back at the time in 2008, it was the dictator Lansana Conté who was in power. He'd been in power for 24 years. And the report says that his wife, his 4th wife at the time, received $8 million from BSGR to facilitate the deal. And that's why, according to the government, the deal must now be cancelled.
Well, it can't be going down particularly well with on Steinmetz's side of things.
Absolutely. They're furious. They're strongly denying the accusations, and they're going even further. And I'd like to quote, they say the Ghanaian government is relying on fabricated claims to justify Condé's carefully orchestrated plan to reward political allies who allegedly helped rig his election by providing them with BSGR's legally acquired mining rights. And now many sources believe that BSGR will appeal this case and bring it to an international court of justice.
Nicolas Chemin giving us the lowdown. Well, that wraps up Africa News from me for today. I'll be back with more tomorrow, though. Join us then if you can. Take care.